I'm Sarina Fazan, taking a risk, making a difference, and changing the course of your life. Remarkable stories from people defying the odds. You're listening to On the Record. Hi, everyone. It's Sarina Fazan, and thank you so much for joining us for On the Record. As many know, I'm a journalist, I'm a host, and I'm also a producer, but I'm also a very strong supporter of promoting females, especially young girls, strong women. So I'm honored to have Lissette Campos here. She's an 8-time Emmy award-winning journalist, and you have so many other awards too that we can't even list all the awards because you have so many. Well, Lissette and I actually worked together years ago. So Lissette, tell us what you're doing right now.
Well, I am now with the team at Florida Blue, Blue Cross and Blue Shield of Florida. I will be joining their corporate communications team, and I will be embedded with a team in the West Florida area serving Tampa Bay, Manatee County, Sarasota, the Fort Myers area. I'm really excited to join such an amazing company. Florida Blue does so much for our communities across the state, and it'll be really great for me to learn from them how to serve my community in an even more special way.
Well, they're lucky to have you, and you've held a lot of hats. So let's begin with your journey, though. You are of Cuban descent, but you were born in New York.
Yes.
So tell us, though, about your parents. So your parents came here from Cuba?
Yes, my parents came here from Cuba in 1961. They came, a few years after the Cuban Revolution. And so my mom and my dad came separately. They were 19 years old. Came with nothing but the clothes on their back, had to start over. And it was very traumatic for them. My mom in Cuba was getting ready to start medical school. And my dad at that time had just graduated from the top arts school in Havana. And he was getting ready, for what he thought would be his dream job of being a commercial artist. And the revolution came, changed their lives. And so their parents sent them to the United States. And my parents came separately. They were not a couple or anything, but they came and Catholic Charities settled them in New York because that's where they had sponsors to give them jobs and a place to live. And so mom tells these crazy stories about Mineola, New York, and, going from Havana, 72 degrees in September, to New York in September, where it's cold and it's 40 degrees and, she didn't have a coat. My dad, similar stories too. My dad always tells a story of arriving in New York and he had a distant friend of the family went to the airport to pick him up. And they drove him past Central Park. And my dad arrived in October of 1961. And all the leaves from the trees were off the trees. It was fall. And my dad said, "Oh my gosh, why do they kill the trees here?" And because he had never seen fall foliage. He lived in Cuba, grew up in Cuba. He'd never seen that. And to this day, I keep a photograph, a painting that my dad did. He did in pencil of his first sight of Central Park in that fall. And so I grew up hearing all these great stories about strangers and nonprofits that came alongside of them and helped them have that first Thanksgiving, have that first Christmas, going to the thrift store once they were a couple and got married and buying, their dishes, their toaster, their forks, like everything that they had when they were first starting their life in the U.S. was from local charities. And so it's just really cool. I'm very proud of my Cuban heritage. I was born in Long Island, New York, so I'm a Long Islander. And I lived in Long Island until I was 5 years old. And then my parents moved to Miami, Florida, so that they could join the extended family. And my dad said he was just done with the winters of New York, where he had to wake up, extra early just to turn the car on to heat it up before he could drive off to work.
I don't blame him, actually. So did your parents meet in Cuba or did they meet in New York?
My parents met in New York, yes.
That's so romantic.
And my mom will say that they fell in love over their salty tears because they would cry over the dining room table over my mom missing her dad and my father, an only son, missing his mom and dad in Cuba, and just how hard life was and how difficult and different it was. I mean, we're talking about two kids who came from very well-to-do families. They're very educated. They thought they knew English. And they get here and they realize that their English doesn't go beyond Mary is a girl,
Right.
John is a boy, and Spot is a dog. Like that's it. So they had to learn the language. They had to learn, the culture, just how different it is. And they had to get jobs and 2 or 3 jobs at a time. One of those jobs always had to be at a restaurant so that they could bring home the leftover food. And these are 2 kids who grew up very comfortable, where everything they needed was provided for them. So it was quite a shock.
So these are the stories that you grew up with. So you moved to Miami then when you're 5 years old.
Yeah.
Did you, and I know you talk so warmly of your family, when did you know that you wanted to go into broadcast journalism? And I know that has taken on so many great roles for you.
Yeah.
But when did you know that that's the field you wanted to enter?
I knew from the moment I was in junior high school. I had an English teacher, and that's why I love teachers. And I always say, go back and say thank you to that teacher if you can, because the teachers never hear back from the students that they impacted, And I had an honors English teacher in junior high school, and she said to me, Mrs. Carrillo was her name, and she said, Lissette, I think that you need to take an honors class, honors English. I want to change you from this class to an honors class because your writing is exceptional. And I thought, that's kind of weird because nobody had ever said that to me before.
And your writing is exceptional.
Thank you.
It is exceptional.
And so that was for me the beginning of really coming to the realization that, wow, maybe there are careers where people can write for a living. And then I did the research, and then my teachers would kind of encourage me to join the school yearbook, join the school newspaper. And I did that through junior high school, college. So by the time I was 15 years old, I knew that I wanted to be a reporter when I grew up.
So when you say reporter, though, at this point, did you know if it was television or print or
no?
But you just wanted to be a reporter?
I just wanted to tell people stories. And so I was the pesky kid that would sit in front of the tío and the tía and the abuela and say, what did you do when what was your first whatever? And they're like, oh my God, go play with the other kids. And I wanted to be with the adults asking them questions. So my mom was not surprised when I said I wanted to be a reporter when I grew up.
So you graduate high school, you go to college.
Yeah.
And do you major in journalism?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And where did you go to college?
I went to Florida International University. Keep in mind, my family is a very strict Cuban family. So when all of my friends were applying to, Gainesville and going away to Tallahassee, some of them went to California, Boston. My mom and dad said, olvídate, you're staying home, ni muerta, no, over our dead body, So I had no other choice but to go to the local school. I had a free ride because my grades were so high, so I didn't go to community college. I went straight into Florida International University, and my first 2 years were paid. But I was not happy at first because
I was going to ask you
all
that
of my
question.
friends were going away to school and to college, and I wanted to as well. But I got a great education at FIU, and my journalism degree really helped me even greater because I stayed home, because I stayed in Miami, because I was able to intern at the local Univision station and really got my foot in the door. Even before I graduated, I was able to land my first job on television, which probably would not have happened if I would have studied, away somewhere else.
Well, that's what I always say. I have 4 amazing interns here, and I always tell them that hands-on experience can really lead you to landing a job.
Yes.
So you landed a job at Univision.
Mm-hmm.
Was that your first?
My first.
Okay. So what did you do? And at this point, now since you interned at Univision, do you know in your heart now that, okay, I want to pursue television?
Oh, yes.
Okay. So pick it up from there.
Yeah,
pick it up from
there. My dad told me, my dad and my mom were very active in the community. And so there was this community luncheon that they were going to. And my dad said, the keynote speaker to this luncheon is going to be the main anchor of the Univision station. Why don't you come with me and you will meet her? So I said, perfect. So I went in, I did the luncheon, I met her, I talked to her afterwards, shook her hand probably a lot longer than I should have. And I think she felt sorry for me because I said, I want to be just like you when I grow up, blah, blah, blah. And I said, I'm studying at FIU. Is there any way that I can visit you at the station? And so she said, yes, here's my card. Why don't you call me? And so sure enough, I called her the very next day. I met her on a Sunday and I called her on a Monday.
And that's great advice, right? To other young women or other young students out there is to
be
follow
assertive,
up.
follow through. And so one thing led to another. And she suggested after I came, she saw that I was genuinely interested. She said, why don't you ask the news director if they would give you an internship? And maybe that way you can come on a regular basis because, visiting once is not the same thing as coming on a regular basis. So I talked to the news director and I said, is there any way? And he says, well, we don't really do that. We don't have like formal internships, but if you want to sign a paper, a release form, I said, yeah, the paper that says if I get injured, maimed, killed on a story, I won't sue you. Yeah, give me the paper. I'll sign it right here. And so that's how I started my internship at the local Univision station. I would come in, I would do whatever they needed, whether it was fetching coffee for an anchor or cutting the scripts off of the printer and taking them to the anchors. Whatever they needed, I did. And after a while, they got so used to having me around that when there was a special project that they needed an extra hand on, they would train me. So I learned how to be a producer. I learned how to be an associate producer. I learned what it was to be a rookie reporter. I learned about the assignment desk and taking calls and calling the police departments and asking, this is, the Univision affiliate. Do you have anything going on? Like I learned all of that. And I was just an intern. So by the time that I graduated, I had already been a full-time reporter for almost a year.
And as an intern.
I started as an intern, but that opened the door for me to be able to get a job being a feature reporter. I wasn't like everyday reporting, but I was a feature reporter by then, reporting 2 days a week.
Which is great, though. So how long did you work at Univision?
I worked at Univision for a number of years. I worked at Univision, I guess, almost 5 years. And then I had the chance to jump into English language station. And that's when I went from the Univision local in Miami to the CBS affiliate in Miami. And I worked there for almost 9 years.
And that's where you won your first Emmy.
I won my first Emmy in Spanish.
And what was your first Emmy?
It was for an undercover story that I did in Russia. And I love to tell this story because I want girls to know, and boys too, that, never let anyone underestimate you. Especially don't ever underestimate yourself. I had a newsroom where I was being told that I was too young, that I was too ugly to be on TV, that my Spanish was terrible, that I had to work on my Spanish, that my English wasn't good enough to go into English. Like it was not a healthy environment. And yet this reporter who was not pretty enough, whose Spanish was not good enough, whose English was not good enough, I won my first Emmy. And at the same time, by the time I went to pick up my Emmy, I was no longer working for them. I was working for the CBS affiliate in town. So I disproved everything that they said about me. And so you should never let anyone tell you what you're going to be or what you're going to do, because only you can decide for yourself.
That is such valuable advice. And we're going to take a quick break because I want to come back and talk about, because you said it was an undercover story in Russia.
In Russia.
Okay. Is that a cliffhanger or what? Okay. We'll be right back. This podcast is brought to you by Autism Shifts.
Kind of used to seeing autism through, the lens of its challenges, everything that's hard about it. And what we've been able to do through our program, and me as a mom, I've been able to shift that perspective and start looking at the whole diagnosis differently. And when I do, I can see the capabilities, I can see the possibilities for our community. And really, that's the opportunity we have, is to help people within our community see that.
For more information, visit autismshifts.org. Hi, everyone. Okay, welcome back to On the Record. I'm here with Lissette Campos, and she's telling us about her first Emmy win out of 8, and it's when she went undercover for an undercover story in Russia. So tell us about that, Lissette.
So here I was in the newsroom, and they were talking about different stories. And at that point, Mikhail Gorbachev was opening up the economy of Russia. And there was more of an open dialogue between Russia and the United States. And the Cuban government was not very happy about that. And so they had recalled all of their Cuban students who were at the different universities in Russia. And there was this core group of about 200 Cuban students who said, we're not going back. And if you know anything about Cuba, you know that, they remove your passport. All of your travel documents are kept at the Cuban embassy. They're tightly controlled. And so this group of about 200 Cuban students were living in the underground. They had Russian citizens helping them rent apartments, get jobs, buying food on the black market in the streets. I mean, they were doing whatever they had to so that they would not have to go back to Cuba. And so I suggested that we go to Moscow and see and help tell their story. And the Cuban American National Foundation, which was a very strong, well-placed PAC group, Political Action Committee, very active in Congress, said, if you go and you all do a story, we will use those stories to show to members of the Senate and the House of Representatives to help them get them a visa to come to the U.S. So, of course, I'm the youngest reporter in the newsroom, the rookie reporter. Nobody's taking me seriously. So they say, that's a great idea. We're going to give it to so-and-so, a gentleman in the newsroom. He's like, can you go? And he goes, yeah. So I was like,
are you kidding?
That's
my idea.
So I walked over. I wasn't as brave as I should have been. And I walked over to the reporter and I said, listen, that was my idea. Do you have a problem with them giving it to you? He goes, yeah, I kind of feel bad. I said, well, I just want you to know that, I'm going to go and I'm going to ask for that. And if I ask them to give me that story because it was my idea, and they ask you, would you please say that what you just told me, you feel a little uncomfortable stealing my story? And he says, okay. But he did not think that they were going to ask him. He just thought they were going to say, that's nicely said, but he's still going.
Absolutely. I know.
But they made the mistake of asking him.
No.
And so when they did, he said, yeah, it is. I do feel uncomfortable about going. But
so he was honest.
He was honest.
So I have to say, I've got to give it to him.
He was honest. So they ended up sending me. I ended up going by myself from Miami. I flew, I don't know how many places I flew. It was crazy. Like an Aeroflot, which is you don't know what you don't know. Like ignorance is bliss. Like I felt like the whole plane was going to come apart. Like it was rattling. I thought I was going to die on the plane. Aeroflot going to Russia, stopped in all these different places. I get there by myself. And then a photographer was waiting for me there, a photographer who was freelancing for me that weekend. And for the next 5 days, I did stories on the Cubans who were living there. They knew that I was coming. They knew who I was. And so they would tell me their stories. There was a girl who was pregnant and terrified that if she didn't get out by the time she hit her 9th month, what is she going to do? She can't have a baby underground. There was the other gentleman who was, working at a nightclub at night. And then during the day, he was, basically selling some vegetables on the street corner. So they were telling me their stories of how they lived. And I remember one day they said, let's take you to Red Square so that you can see it. And you can see how pretty it is. And even though it's bitterly cold and we want to get out of here, but it is a beautiful place. And that one day, that was the only time I felt terrified. I'm very short, if you haven't noticed. And so Russians tend to be very tall people. And so these little Cuban guys and the girls are in their big long coats. They've got the big hats on. They've got the boots. They would wear boots with a high elevation on purpose so that they would be higher and closer to the height of the Russians, so they would blend into the crowd better.
Wow.
But I didn't, I was there in my little coat, my whatever. And so whenever the military would come in, this is a tightly controlled society. In the middle of Red Square, whenever the soldiers would come close just to see what we were doing, they would disappear. So I would look around and the people that brought me there were gone. So it would be like, oh my God, I'm by myself.
Out of my mind.
It's like, where are your papers? I'm like, I'm a tourist. I'm an American. I would bring out my little, who are you here with? oh, nobody. I'm just walking here, whatever. My friends are in the hotel. And that's how I did that for 5 days. By the time I left, my stomach was in shambles because it was really stressful. I felt at any moment they're gonna know what I'm doing. And I didn't want anybody to get in trouble. You know, I didn't want them to follow the Cubans who were there helping me. So I came back, I did my stories. The stories were shared on the Univision station. They made a special. The stories were shared by the Political Action Committee in Washington, D.C., and they did get visas a few months later. Wow. And 221 of them came to the United States, and they're still here.
And that's why we become journalists, to make a difference.
To make a difference.
How old were you at this time, would you say?
I would have been 22.
22. Right up. So, and you've done so many amazing stories
Thank you.
In your career. And when we talk about this is why we become a journalist, we also want people to know that this was also during a time when local television, I feel, really made a huge impact on people's lives. TV as we see it now is changing.
Very different.
Very different. It's not, it's
very different.
Unfortunately, not the same. I mean, national news probably has, more leeway. So of course we can talk so much about your stories, but that being so, you've won 8 Emmys. Always thought, probably just like me, we would be, in local TV, broadcast television.
Yeah.
But your life has taken on so many great layers.
Yeah.
So after your broadcast journalism career, and it's still broadcast journalism because you're doing so much of it, but in local television spanned how many years, would you say?
I would say that it was about 25.
And she did, clearly, I know some people are listening to this podcast, but other people are watching. She does not look old enough because you did take a break before you came back to a local station in Tampa where you worked at Disney.
I did. I did public affairs for the Disney company. I was based out of Walt Disney World Parks and Resorts. I learned a lot. I was there for a year and I learned so much because they have such interesting and just a diverse group of people that come with training from all over the world. So it was a really great learning experience. I did not like Orlando though. And so my family and I took the first opportunity to move back to Tampa Bay.
So then, I know you're starting, again, your career has taken many layers. Did you talk to us though about, you've also consulted?
Yes,
right?
I've done consulting.
So can you tell us about that a little bit and about some of your freelance things?
Yeah, I think that, and that's the beauty of a podcast like this, that you never know who's listening. And so the hope is that whoever is listening is going to be fed something that they need. Because when you have people who share their stories and share them with authenticity and vulnerability, that's when people learn that life isn't perfect all the time. And unfortunately, a lot of our young people, they think they're too rigid. I have my plan. This is what I'm going to do. We're used to the drive-through where we order something, we get it. We're used to ordering something from Amazon and we pick the color, we pick the size, we pick everything exactly. We can track it. We know when it's coming. And so think about it mentally and emotionally. You're used to being in control all the time. So when things don't happen as you plan them, not everybody can pivot. And I think it's very important for people to know that in life, the most important skill that you can have is the ability to adapt. Adapt or you die. I mean, it is very important. You have to adapt, whether it's in your personal life or your professional life. And know that it's not a failure until you stop trying. And that people need to just gather themselves, take a moment, take a breath, and think, okay, what am I going to do next? And so that is how I fell out of television, my traditional anchor reporter role, and started doing consulting and now I'm going to be part of a corporate communications team for Florida Blue, the largest health insurer in the state of Florida. And it's because, life happens and things don't always go as you planned. And then what do you do? And so it's important not to fall apart. It's important to think, okay, what life skills do I have that can translate. So instead of saying, hi, I'm Lissette Campos, I'm an anchor, I'm a reporter, I had to learn to say, hi, I'm Lissette Campos, and I'm a master storyteller. I can help you tell your story. And so the clients that came to work with me, I was helping them tell their story about why they were doing what they were doing, or what made their company different, or what made their product important to the consumer. And so I find that, and I'm sure it's the same with you, I find that people who don't think they have a great story are oftentimes the ones with the best story.
Yes. And everybody has a story.
And everybody has a story. And so, and when you dig deeper, you find that everyone has a story of adversity. And it's how they overcome. Adversity will come. Death, taxes, and adversity, 100% guaranteed, right? So it's how you adapt, how you pivot, how you respond to those moments in life. And so, my career, when I dreamed of being a reporter, I thought I was going to be a reporter until
you retired.
And that's just not the way life worked out. But I wouldn't trade the pivots, the changes, the unexpected curveballs for anything, because they've made me the strong person that I am today.
Well, see, this is why I wanted you on our very special inspirational women series.
Thank you.
I can't even tell you, sitting here today, my heart is so full because of all the advice you've given me in this. And we can do a whole nother podcast on all of your other Emmys, and I feel like we cut that short. So we have to invite you back for that.
Thank you.
And Lissette, I want to also, this podcast I want to do, and if I start crying, in memory of your dad.
Thank you.
Because I know that you've been talking about your dad, and you lost your dad.
My dad was my hero.
My
dad was my hero. It's and that was, it's very hard to lose someone you love that is so amazing. A lot of people don't understand, and they say, gosh, it's been 6 years since you lost your dad. How can you still, you really have to move on for the sake of your husband, for the sake of your children. And I always say, grieving doesn't have an expiration date. Grieving doesn't have a timetable. You grieve because you love. And so I've learned that through fighting the tears, and I've learned that this is a price that I pay for loving my dad so much, for having been blessed by such an amazing man as a dad. And it was my dad who taught me about adapting. It was my dad who taught me about, loving myself, that you're not better than anyone, but no one is better than you. That failure is only a failure when you stop trying. All those things that he poured into me. My mom poured those things into me, but my mom was not the same style as my dad. My dad was much more gallant. My mom was feisty and sassy. She's still with us. She's 78, but mom is like the sassy one. So mom is like, and ba 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 ba, But Papi was, the gentleman, and so it still hurts. But life is like that, and we just have to again adapt and find the beauty in things around us, and find that silver lining in whatever we're going through. Instead of, there's so many different phrases that you could use, but another one is, is the glass half empty? No, the glass is half full.
It is always half full.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for reminding us of that and filling up our glasses and our hearts. Lissette Campos, thank you so much for being here for our inspirational women series. Thanks again.